Hi, and welcome to Legally Insane News. I'm your host, Kyle O'Donnell. Find and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Kyle O'Donnell, and head over to legallyinsanefilms.com to listen to my other podcasts, to read my books and articles, to check out my photos from around the world, and to watch my documentary films. Again, that's legallyinsanefilms.com. In an NBC News report that came out the day after the conference that revealed the new rule, officers, quote, won't be allowed to chase people on foot if they're suspected of minor offenses such as parking violations, driving on a suspended license, or drinking alcohol in public, end quote.
So the new policy that we put out today is clearer for officers, and I think it's a lot easier to understand.
The jury's still out, of course, on whether or not this means that people stopped for these offenses will now take it upon themselves to just sprint in the other direction to avoid being charged for a crime. But for now, I think this has been enacted so that it will avoid some travesties that are already sort of taking place.
In March of last year, Chicago police chased 13-year-old Adam Toledo down a little village alley. He is shot to death a split second after he tosses a gun behind a fence. 2 days later, 22-year-old Anthony Alvarez is killed by police under similar circumstances in Portage Park. Now a CPD foot pursuit policy developed in the wake of those shootings has been finalized.
Let's face it, just like any other rule that has a gaping potential for loopholes, these loopholes will be exploited. It comes back, however, to what's generally better for the greater half of public good in terms of citizens dying as a result of outmoded police policies regarding the use of force. And again, I should state that just because a policy exists in Chicago does not mean it will, do well in Rhode Island or Virginia or wherever else. I mean, they have their own problems and they're trying to deal with those. And I applaud them for doing that. I mean, this is one step in the direction that finds a middle ground.
According to the new policy, an officer should only start or continue a pursuit if there is probable cause for arrest. Body cams must be activated. Pursuits are prohibited for minor traffic violations and can be terminated at any time by supervisors. Finally, officers must consider alternatives.
I'm not sure where I land, frankly, on the city's decision to enact this policy, but I can say that Chicago has routinely made bleeps on my radar when I've looked into violent crimes over recent years. They always seem to come up as a place, kind of like a hot ground for police-related violence, police-related crimes, and things like that. Baltimore is another frequent recent outcropping there. Specifically, Chicago has extremely tight gun laws that might prohibit normal citizens' ability to defend themselves in a city where homicides are among the highest in the nation.
The impacts on crime has been studied, and we can look back at foot pursuit policies. It's made officers safer, and it's made the community safer.
It also helps bring the city into compliance with a federal consent decree.
Fundamentally, what this comes down to is having a policy that makes sense. This has now been signed off on by the judge, by the monitor, by the attorney general. So I think it's a very solid plan.
But in the past, critics of the policy have said it keeps cops from doing their jobs.
Yeah, you got to do your job constitutionally.
Very, very concerning numbers coming out of Chicago. And just like New York, they've got really staunch gun laws and they have really high rates of crime. These two are undoubtedly related. There's an undoubted correlation. You can only have so many cities have that ratio before you start paying attention to that. In fact, in just the first month of 2016, 316 homicides were reported, many of which were the result of gun violence. But New York City, to continue that comparison, it's 3 times the size of Chicago, and it's only had 244 homicides in the first half of the year. So I'm not saying they only have 244 homicides. That's a horrible number, right? But to have less homicides in 6 times the amount of time as a smaller city, 1/3 of its size, that speaks volumes for the violence happening in Chicago. That's undoubtedly gang related. I'll do a little research and maybe I'll cite some references there. Whatever the case happens to be, I'm sure that we'll see a lot more statistics coming out of the Midwest's largest city as this policy is put to the test. The policy was also apparently long awaited. It's a subject of some hot debate in recent months by Chicagoans demanding change to police activities that have allowed so many police-involved killings to go down. In fact, it's both inspired from and very closely aligned with the earlier draft of the measure, which the AP reports, quote, among its rules, the new policy prohibits foot pursuits for minor traffic violations, bars officers from separating from their partners if they can't see the suspect they're chasing, or if the officer or the suspect is injured. Under the new policy, the chase must end if the officer has lost track of their location or their surroundings, or if there is too great a distance or too many obstacles between the officer and the suspect that they're chasing, and if they're not able to control the suspect of the chase in a confrontation. I think that last sentence there is if they've lost the ability to control the suspect of the chase in a confrontation. That part of it I agree with. I have no idea what Chicago police challenges are on a day-to-day basis, and I'm not going to pretend to speak for those. I'm not going to generalize. They probably go through a hell of a lot, and if I have any police from Chicago listening to this podcast, I applaud your efforts. That's got to be a tough nut to crack. I used to live in Chicago. I got out of the Navy in Chicago. I know exactly what danger lurks there, and it's very serious. Even if the statistics didn't reflect that, it's serious. They didn't mean business out there. I don't know why Chicago wound up being that place either. Like, why such a breeding ground for gang violence and things. But in any case, that last sentence spoke to me because I recently did an article and a podcast about Patrick Loyola, who was killed by Officer Christopher Schur. And he was on the ground. The cop just flat out shot him in the back of the head. He was on the ground. He was, I don't know if he was ever a threat, but he certainly wasn't a threat when the officer was on top of him. He had a little more to go until he wrestled his hands into cuffs, but he just shot him in the back of the head. I mean, there was no danger to Patrick himself. There was no danger to anybody standing by. There was no danger to the officer. I don't think at any point anybody was actually in danger, and the officer just shot him in the back of the head. Kid bled out right there and has left his parents childless. By the way, they were immigrants from the Congo. You imagine coming to America, having a cop shoot your kid? Yeah, my heart bleeds for that kid. I just, that's so much was wrong with that. Reeling it back in though, I think it's possible that sort of scene has played out in Chicago at least a couple of times. We'll have to kind of see how the statistics on that play out as that policy is put to the test. For the next few episodes, I'm sticking with the theme of gun-related stories in the news. So on the next edition of Legally Insane News, I'll be talking about an attempted robbery gone wrong when a man attempted to take money from a gun store while wielding a knife. Talk about your all-time justifiable reason not to bring a knife to a gunfight. That's it for this edition of Legally Insane News. Make sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Kyle O'Donnell for updates and extras on this and other stories. If you're listening to this podcast at legallyinsanefilms.com or the Small Town Justice page, be sure to also download the Spreaker app, where you can directly subscribe and help me bump up my download totals. If you like this episode of Legally Insane News, consider becoming a supporting member. For just $3, you can get access to members-only unreleased articles and podcasts, case files on our latest investigations, updates for events and conventions that we're attending, and discounts on swag. To do that, just head over to patreon.com/legallyinsanefilms. There are 3 different memberships, each with more content than the one before. This is where I release all of my documentary films with outtakes and extras, as well as another podcast called Small Town Justice. You can check those out by going to legallyinsanefilms.com and clicking Join the Fan Club. Send any questions, comments, feedback, and show ideas to thejusticepod@gmail.com. This has been a production of Legally Insane Films, LLC. I'm your host, Kyle O'Donnell. We'll see you next time.